In 2025, a sense of unease swept the world. Scientists warned of supercharged storms as record-warm oceans fueled historic rainfall. Floods struck cities and countrysides alike, revealing that no region was immune. News shifted from distant climate debates to urgent local alerts. The world watched, holding its breath as communities faced a new era of synchronized, devastating floods. Before the Atlantic hurricane season even began, the world was battered by catastrophic floods on an unprecedented scale. From Texas to Nigeria, Argentina to Indonesia, and Spain to South Africa, entire communities were submerged, lives upended, and cities transformed. These disasters were not isolated but interconnected symptoms of a planet in crisis, climate change unfolding in real time. Behind the headlines, the 2025 floods were not just statistics, they were personal tragedies. In Texas, Nigeria, Jakarta, and Bolivia, families lost homes, futures, and loved ones. Yet amid devastation, communities united. Volunteers, neighbors, and first responders showed resilience and compassion. These events remind us, the human cost of climate change is real, and our response must be global, urgent, and compassionate. On July 4th, the Texas Hill Country awoke to a festive, humid morning. Families gathered by the Guadalupe River, unaware of the danger building above. A stalled weather front, heavy with Gulf moisture, hovered unseen. As the sky darkened, the river's calm masked a coming torrent. By the time the first signs appeared, it was already too late. The storm erupted suddenly, a violent rain bomb, unleashing a torrential downpour that blurred the landscape and drowned out all sound. Visibility vanished. The ground, baked hard by summer, couldn't absorb the water. Rivers and creeks swelled into raging torrents, sweeping away everything in their path. The deluge descended with terrifying speed, catching the Texas Hill Country completely off guard. Camp Mystic, a beloved girls' camp on the Guadalupe, was transformed from a place of summer joy into chaos as floodwaters rose with terrifying speed. Teenage counselors became heroes, guiding children through the darkness and swirling currents. Despite their bravery, many lives were lost. The tragedy at Camp Mystic stands as a somber reminder of nature's power and the risks of building in a floodplain. On July 4th, the official warning systems failed. No alerts came as floodwaters rose, leaving residents and tourists dangerously exposed. In the absence of help, the community stepped up. State Representative Josie Garcia and local volunteers organized rescues, set up shelters, and saved lives. The Texas Hill Country flood became a story of both systemic failure and extraordinary community resilience. After the flood, devastation stretched across Texas. Homes were destroyed, ancient cypress trees scarred, and the Guadalupe River left behind thick mud and debris. Lake Buchanan surged to its highest level in decades, submerging docks and lakeside homes, a stark warning of the storm's magnitude. The swollen lake became a symbol, a warning that Texas must adapt to a future of more extreme floods. The Texas floods were just one verse in a global chorus of catastrophe. In 2025, extreme weather unleashed floods across continents: Africa, Asia, South America, Europe, overwhelming defenses and leaving devastation everywhere. From Lagos to Buenos Aires, families were swept from homes, livelihoods destroyed, and nations forced to confront a new era of climate crisis. The floods of 2025 were a deafening global alarm, a shared experience and a wake-up call for humanity.
Seen a lot of change, been through a lot of pain. Some things
In May 2025, the community of Mokwa in western Nigeria was struck by a disaster that was both natural and man-made. Weeks of unusually heavy and persistent rainfall, far exceeding the seasonal average, had saturated the region. The Niger River and its tributaries swelled to dangerous levels, placing immense pressure on the area's aging infrastructure. The focal point of this pressure was a local dam, a structure that was supposed to provide protection and manage water flow. Instead, it became a ticking time bomb. The relentless rains were a product of the changing climate, but the dam's vulnerability was a product of years of neglect and inadequate investment, a fatal combination that set the stage for unimaginable horror. The moment of failure was sudden and catastrophic. Under the immense weight of the floodwaters, the dam breached. A towering wall of water, mud, and debris was unleashed, roaring downstream with the force of an inland tsunami. It slammed into Mokwa and the surrounding villages with practically no warning. Homes constructed from mud brick and simple materials stood no chance against the torrent. They dissolved into the churning water in seconds. The flood wave erased entire communities from the map, leaving behind a vast muddy lake where thousands of people had lived just moments before. The sound, survivors later recalled, was a horrifying roar that consumed everything in its path. The human cost was staggering and immediate. The official death toll eventually surpassed 500 people, but local leaders insisted the true number was far higher, with many victims washed away and never recovered. Beyond the fatalities, the scale of destruction was immense. More than 4,000 homes were completely destroyed, leaving tens of thousands of people homeless and with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Farms were inundated, crops were ruined, and livestock were lost, wiping out the primary source of livelihood for the entire region. The Mokwa flood was not just a loss of life, it was the complete obliteration of a community's social and economic foundation. In the aftermath, rescue and relief efforts were severely hampered by the very conditions that caused the disaster. The floodwaters had washed away roads and bridges, isolating the affected area and making it nearly impossible for aid to reach the desperate survivors. The Nigerian government, alongside international aid agencies, scrambled to respond, but the logistical challenges were immense. The Mokwa Dam collapse became a brutal case study in the danger of cascading failures, where extreme weather caused by climate change exploits existing weaknesses in infrastructure, leading to a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale that overwhelms a nation's ability to respond effectively. In June 2025, relentless winter storms battered South Africa's Eastern Cape, unleashing days of torrential rain on already saturated ground. Floods and mudslides swept through impoverished communities, destroying homes and claiming over 100 lives. Informal settlements on hillsides and river plains were hit hardest, with rivers bursting their banks and hillsides collapsing into rivers of mud. Thousands were displaced, seeking shelter in overcrowded community halls and schools. The South African Defense Force scrambled to rescue stranded residents, but the devastation was overwhelming. The disaster exposed how climate change hits the most vulnerable, revealing deep inequalities and the urgent need for climate resilience. For South Africa, these floods were a stark reminder. Climate justice and social justice are inseparable. Late June 2025, Pakistan's Swat Valley was ravaged by catastrophic flash floods, triggered by intense rain and accelerated glacier melt. A wall of water carrying debris and boulders tore through the valley, obliterating bridges, roads, and entire communities. The Swat Expressway was destroyed, isolating the region and hampering rescue efforts. Over 180 lives were lost, many caught off guard by the sudden surge. Thousands were stranded, with the military mounting dangerous helicopter rescues. The disaster highlighted the growing threat of glacial lake outburst floods and the urgent need for early warning systems in mountain regions. Swat's tragedy was a warning. Climate extremes are accelerating, and mountain communities are on the front lines. In March 2025, Bahia Blanca, Argentina, was inundated by over 290 millimeters of rain in a single day, more than it usually receives in months. Urban drainage failed instantly, turning streets into rivers and submerging neighborhoods. Power outages and building collapses followed, with 17 lives lost and emergency services overwhelmed. The city's infrastructure, built for a milder climate, was no match for the storm's intensity. The aftermath left a thick layer of mud, billions in damages, and a city forced to confront its vulnerability. The disaster sparked urgent calls for climate-resilient urban planning across Argentina. Bahia Blanca's flood was a harsh lesson. Even cities far from hurricane zones are now on the climate crisis front lines. In March 2025, Jakarta faced catastrophic flooding as monsoon rains overwhelmed a city already sinking and threatened by rising seas. Key roads and neighborhoods were submerged, displacing over 90,000 people and causing at least 9 deaths. Emergency shelters overflowed, raising fears of disease outbreaks. Each flood chips away at Jakarta's resilience, disrupting lives and livelihoods. Massive infrastructure projects are underway, but the 2025 floods showed time is running out for millions. Jakarta's struggle is a warning for coastal megacities worldwide. Climate change, urbanization, and poverty are converging. The city's battle with water is a glimpse into a future many cities may soon face. In early 2025, Bolivia endured a slow-motion disaster as relentless El Niño rains caused rivers to overflow, flooding vast regions. Hundreds of thousands of families lost crops, livestock, and homes, threatening national food security. Entire villages were isolated for weeks, with the government declaring a state of emergency and mobilizing the military for rescue and aid. The scale of the disaster overwhelmed local resources, and recovery was hampered by lingering floodwaters. Bolivia's experience showed that slow, persistent floods can devastate economies and communities as much as sudden disasters. The crisis underscored the need for climate adaptation in agriculture and rural planning. In July 2025, Spain's peak tourist season was shattered by severe storms and flash floods across half the country. Urban areas saw streets turn to rivers, metro systems shut down, and tourists wading through famous plazas. Emergency services were stretched thin, rescuing people from flooded hotels and vehicles. The floods crippled Spain's tourism industry, causing massive economic losses just as the season began. The disaster forced a national reckoning on climate adaptation and infrastructure upgrades. Spain's floods proved that even developed nations are not immune to climate extremes. The summer of 2025 was a wake-up call. The climate crisis is here, threatening economies and ways of life across Europe. Looking back at the catastrophic floods that swept across Nigeria, South Africa, Pakistan, Argentina, Indonesia, Bolivia, and Spain in the first half of 2025, it becomes impossible to view them as isolated events. They were not a series of unfortunate, disconnected weather phenomena. Instead, they were the synchronized global symptoms of a single underlying disease, a planetary climate system destabilized by excess heat. The specific trigger in each location may have differed: a failed dam, a stalled front, a glacial lake outburst flood. But the fuel for each disaster was the same. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, and warmer oceans provide that moisture, turning ordinary weather systems into carriers of extraordinary and destructive rainfall. This series of disasters painted a terrifyingly clear picture of global vulnerability. The crisis was not confined to the developing world or the global south. While nations like Bolivia and Nigeria suffered immense human and economic losses relative to their capacity, developed nations like Spain were also brought to their knees, their modern infrastructure overwhelmed by the sheer volume of water. The floods acted as a great equalizer, demonstrating that no amount of economic development can provide complete immunity from the forces of a fundamentally altered climate. The events connected us all in a shared experience of vulnerability, from a farmer in the Bolivian lowlands to a vacationer on the Spanish coast. The global nature of the crisis also exposed the interconnectedness of our world in other ways. The floods disrupted global supply chains, impacted agricultural markets, and placed an unprecedented strain on international aid organizations. A disaster in one country had ripple effects across the globe. This interconnectedness is a double-edged sword. While it spreads the impact of a crisis, it also underscores the profound need for global cooperation and solidarity. No single nation can solve the climate crisis alone, and no single nation can weather its impacts in isolation. The floods of 2025 were a global problem demanding a global solution. Ultimately, the stories from these 7 nations serve as a powerful collective warning. They are the narrative of a world that has crossed a dangerous threshold. The abstract projections of climate models had become the lived reality for millions of people. The floods of Nigeria, South Africa, Pakistan, Argentina, Indonesia, Bolivia, and Spain were the opening act of a new and more dangerous chapter in our planet's history. They were a clear and urgent call to action, a demand for a radical shift in how we manage our planet, our infrastructure, and our responsibility to one another in the face of a shared and escalating threat. The devastating floods of 2025 were not a fluke but the result of a supercharged atmosphere. A warmer world holds more moisture, about 7% more per degree Celsius, fueling storms with unprecedented rainfall. Slower-moving weather systems, driven by a weakened jet stream, mean rain lingers longer, overwhelming cities worldwide. This is the new reality of a warmer Earth, shaped by human-driven climate change. In 2025, scientists watched as devastating floods confirmed their warnings. The planet is at a tipping point. The link between rising temperatures and extreme rainfall is undeniable, driven by human-caused climate change. Experts agree, this is not the end but the beginning of a new normal. The time for incremental change has passed. Only urgent, transformative action can meet this climate emergency. The litany of disasters in 2025 served as a brutal stress test for the world's infrastructure, and in nearly every case, that infrastructure failed. From the overwhelmed storm drains of Bahia Blanca to the breached dam in Moquegua and the flooded metro stations in Madrid, the events exposed a fundamental and dangerous flaw. Much of our modern world was built for the stable climate of the 20th century, a climate that no longer exists. Our roads, bridges, dams, and cities are simply not designed to withstand the force and volume of 21st century climate change-fueled deluges. The crisis underscored the urgent global need to rethink, redesign, and rebuild our foundational systems to be resilient in the face of this new reality. This infrastructure imperative goes far beyond simply repairing what was broken. A true resilience strategy requires a paradigm shift in engineering and urban planning. It means moving away from the old model of gray infrastructure, concrete-heavy systems designed only to control and divert water, towards a more integrated approach that includes green infrastructure. This involves using and restoring natural systems to manage stormwater. Creating more urban green spaces, restoring wetlands, building permeable pavements, and planting riverside forests can help absorb massive amounts of rainwater, reducing the strain on traditional drainage systems while providing numerous co-benefits like cleaner air and recreational spaces for communities. Investing in this new generation of climate-resilient infrastructure is a monumental task that requires immense political will and financial commitment. The costs will be astronomical, running into the trillions of dollars globally. However, the events of 2025 demonstrated that the cost of inaction is far greater. The economic losses from the floods, in destroyed property, lost business, and disrupted supply chains were staggering. More importantly, the human cost was immeasurable. Investing in resilient infrastructure is not just an economic calculation, it is a moral obligation to protect lives and livelihoods from the predictable and escalating dangers of the climate crisis. It is a down payment on a safer, more secure future. The challenge is particularly acute for developing nations, which often lack the resources to fund such massive undertakings. The tragedies in Nigeria, Pakistan, and Bolivia highlighted this deep inequality. Therefore, a global infrastructure overhaul must be supported by international cooperation and climate finance mechanisms that help the most vulnerable nations build the defenses they desperately need. The disasters of 2025 were a global problem, and fortifying our world against the next wave of floods must be a shared, global project. The future of our cities and communities depends on our ability to build a world that is not just strong but also smart and adaptable. If the floods of 2025 taught a single painful lesson, it was that a warning not received is no warning at all. The tragic failure of the integrated public alert and warning system in Texas, which left residents and campers completely unaware of the impending torrent, was a particularly glaring example of a system failing at its most critical moment. This tragedy, along with the lack of effective warnings in places like Makwa and the Swat Valley, highlighted a critical gap between meteorological forecasting and public communication. The future of saving lives in an era of rapid onset disasters depends on completely reimagining our approach to early warning systems, making them more robust, accessible, and, above all, effective. The next generation of early warning systems must be built on a foundation of impact-based forecasting. This means moving beyond simply telling people what the weather will be, like, heavy rain is expected, and instead telling them what the weather will do. For example, expect life-threatening flash flooding on the Guadalupe River. Evacuate low-lying areas immediately. This requires integrating weather forecasts with data on local geography, infrastructure vulnerability, and population density to provide specific, actionable warnings. It means ensuring that an alert for a mountain valley in Pakistan is different from an alert for a coastal city in Spain, tailored to the unique risks of each location. Technology will play a crucial role in this evolution. The proliferation of mobile phones, even in remote areas, offers an unprecedented opportunity to deliver personalized alerts directly into the hands of those at risk. However, technology is not a silver bullet. The system must have redundancy, using multiple channels like sirens, radio, television, and even community messengers to ensure the warning gets through, especially to the elderly, the poor, and those in remote areas who may not have access to a smartphone. As the Texas failure showed, the most advanced system is useless if it is not activated correctly due to human error or bureaucratic breakdown, emphasizing the need for clear protocols and training. Ultimately, the most effective warning systems are people-centric. They are built with deep community engagement and trust. They rely on local leaders and trained volunteers to help disseminate warnings and mobilize evacuations. This is especially critical in developing countries where formal systems may be weak. The goal is to create a no-surprises culture around extreme weather, where communities are educated about their risks and empowered to act when a warning is issued. The power of prediction is not just in the science of forecasting, but in the art of communication, ensuring that every single person has the information they need to save their own life. In 2025, the threat of climate change became a global reality. Relentless floods shattered illusions of safety, forcing us to adapt to a new, volatile era. Navigating this new climate reality means shifting from reaction to resilience at every level of society. Every solar panel, every act of solidarity, is a step toward a safer future. 2025 was a warning. Our response will define the world ahead. In 2025, the world began to drown. Floods from Texas to Nigeria and Spain were not isolated disasters, but chapters in a single, terrifying story, a planet in distress. The era of debating climate change is over. The consequences are here, faster and more severe than we imagined. We learned resilience means working with nature, not against it. The floods revealed deep inequalities. The most vulnerable pay the highest price. The clearest lesson: climate change is a matter of justice. Solutions must protect those most at risk. The global scale of the 2025 crisis demands a response of equal proportion. The era of isolated nationalistic solutions is over. A flood that begins with melting glaciers in Pakistan can impact supply chains in Europe, and atmospheric rivers fueled by the Pacific can devastate communities in the Americas. We are all connected by a single climate system, and we will either stand together or fall separately. The aftermath of these disasters must be a turning point, a moment where the world finally recognizes that international cooperation is not a choice, but a necessity for survival. This means sharing data, technology, and resources to build a collective defense against a shared threat. This unity must be channeled into immediate and sustainable action. The most critical task is the rapid global transition away from the fossil fuels that are supercharging our atmosphere. This is the root of the problem. While we build better defenses and warning systems, we must simultaneously work to turn off the tap. Every new coal plant, every new oil field is actively making future floods more likely and more deadly. Governments, corporations, and individuals must commit to a future powered by clean energy. This is not just an environmental policy, it is the most effective form of long-term disaster prevention we have. Alongside this energy transition, we must invest in a new generation of sustainable and resilient infrastructure. This means moving beyond gray infrastructure and embracing green solutions. Restoring mangrove forests to protect coastlines, creating urban sponge cities that absorb rainfall, and practicing climate-smart agriculture that preserves soil health are all essential strategies. These solutions do more than just prevent floods. They create healthier, more livable communities and more robust economies. This is an investment not in surviving the next storm, but in thriving in the new climate reality for decades to come, a down payment on a livable future. Finally, this call to action must be underpinned by a commitment to global equity. Wealthier nations, which bear the historical responsibility for the majority of greenhouse gas emissions, have a moral obligation to support more vulnerable countries. This means fulfilling and expanding commitments to climate finance, funding adaptation projects, and facilitating technology transfer. The tragedies in Bolivia, Nigeria, and Pakistan have shown that the world's poorest are on the front lines. A unified global response is only truly unified if it ensures that no one is left behind to face the storm alone. The world's response to 2025 will be judged by how it protects the most vulnerable. Amidst the devastation of 2025, hope emerged, not from governments but from ordinary people. Volunteers, neighbors, and leaders rose to help, forging unity and resilience in the face of disaster. The floods did not break us, they brought us together. Our shared strength and compassion became the foundation for a new, more resilient future. We can choose hope, active, determined, and united, to build a world that can withstand the rising tide.